And Dr. Flynn, your points in your testimony, I think, were well taken, that it's not an attack just on U.S. soil, but an attack on trade and interrupting goods movement in our country. And I'm just wondering if you have, very specific recommendations for how individual ports and the businesses within those ports can really prepare for a contingency plan in the event that we did have an attack, and also specific recommendations for how governmental agencies and what they should be doing for contingency as well.
I really applaud the question and the focus, because unless we assume that this is a zero chance that this will happen, that we'll have a nuclear event, we should have a plan. That's something we can do. It's not a huge cost issue. It's a heavy coordination issue and a collaboration issue. The core challenge is that, as I also laid out in my testimony, this is a global system sort of running on steroids. And so if you disrupt it at any point, increasingly it has cascades across the system. So it's a lot of choreography. Right now, the U.S. government has no plan for how to deal with this beyond the U.S. borders. There is a global strategy the President put out. I think it's the world's thinnest strategy. It's 4.5 pages. It basically says we should have a plan, but nobody actually has executed on that. And thinking through that, so specifics, clearly it's raising the awareness about what this event would look like, and then mechanics about, okay, how do we deal with the immediacy of the dirty bomb? What's safe? I mean, this is something a community can't solve, because the U.S. government has to set what standards are for safety in terms of putting people back into that community. But the coordination is really heavily between the industry that runs this system and the port authorities and the local authorities and the governmental authorities who manage the system. There we have very limited visibility about how it works. And what makes this, I think, a unique and challenging issue for critical infrastructure, the maritime transportation system, is that 90+% of it is internationally owned. It's not U.S. owned. And we have to coordinate, therefore, with those key players. But the opportunity is it's a concentrated industry. There are roughly 5 terminal operators that move about 80% of all the goods to the United States. They're in ports all over the world. You don't have to go to 180 nations. You go to 5 companies. There are basically 20 ocean carriers that matter. You can work with 20 CEOs. What we've been doing is looking at this as a government-to-government issue or a local government issue, when it really is an international private system that we have to have a capability. In our financial meltdown in 2008, we had central bankers who could manage the morning after. It was messy, but we had a system. We have no such system for managing a major disruptive event, and that's something that I think, transcends anything that these agencies here who are here this morning, their jobs to do. But it's a high-order national security and economic security issue for us to wrestle with.
And you had mentioned that we should be listening to industry and businesses clearly in terms of what they believe are the right, what's the right direction and the right plans for contingency. And do you have any idea what they, I guess, would suggest? I mean, in the earlier testimony, they said if we had an incident, industry would just respond, and that would be the contingency plan.
Well, I've worked closely on that and have talked to the CEOs of the largest terminal operators. If there's a plan, they're willing to engage on the plans. There's a business continuity issue for them. If there's a cost recovery mechanism for deploying equipment, they're willing to do that. I had 2 colleagues and I that worked out of the Wharton School looking at 2 choices. The one we have right now, where we would select a box out of a container and send it to be expected at very small percentages, or one where you scan all of them. The terminal operator we work with said, it's easy for me to scan them all than for you to come into my yard, pack 6 high, and grab 2 to get the 1 and take it around. So in some places, it turns out doing more is easier. The economics work better. Okay? And in other places, in sleepier, slower places, you're probably not going to have that same level of buy-in, and then you probably use an approach. There's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. But when you have a conversation with industry, it comes out a lot different than maybe the one you have when you do a government-to-government one. And here, it's an engineering problem. It's an operational problem with some technical complexity, but it's not insoluble. We should not be throwing our hands up in the air and going, let's just hope it never happens. Shame on us when it does happen.
Thank you very much, and I will yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentlelady. We've run out of members. And by the way, this was not a bad showing for today. Usually it's just me and